Chapter 666, Afternoon Town.
That's...
Klein's eyes reflected a nearly transparent object. It appeared like a carapace of something, occasionally shrinking and vanishing from Klein's line of sight, and at times peeking out due to an invisible wind, revealing some of its outlines. With it acting as an anchor point and looking further up, there were colors of green that was almost black, standing there silently.
They look like the colors of the trees of a dark forest.
Klein mumbled without imagining what the object of those colors signified. All he could do was boldly guess that it had something to do with gaining a deeper control of the mysterious space above the gray fog. Without trying to do something that was destined to be in vain, he jumped down from the staircase that seemed to lead to heaven and phased back inside the palace. With the existence of Queen Mystic in mind, Klein did some simple tidying up before leaving the gray fog and returning to his bathroom. After tying up the loose ends, he walked to his suitcase, took out the sun brooch, and wore it on his double-breasted frock coat. After all the turmoil he had been through, the mystical items he could now use had returned to the state when he was in Backland. However, he was already a Sequence 5 and possessed one of the most difficult powers to deal with, below that of the demigods. He was, in the true sense of the word, a powerhouse in the Beyonder world.
I should be very agitated and happy, but I'm actually not. I'm even as excited as when I found mermaids. This is because I've just taken another step on my road to revenge. The true goal I wish to achieve is still a distance away. Following this, I should conclude the principles and digest the marionette's potion, and seek out the corresponding Sequence 4 formula and ingredients. Yes, I can only do all of these things after leaving these waters. Next, I'll seek advice from Mr. Azek, Will Osepton, and a Rhodes. Heh, I should relax for the next few days. Being overly tense might break me down and cause me to have symptoms of losing control.
Klein turned to look at the full-body mirror in his room. Looking at his 1.8-meter-tall build, black hair and brown eyes, with a thin face and cut features, dressed in a white shirt, a suit with a bow tie, and a top hat that was matched with the pale gold sunbird brooch. He wore a calm expression with a deep, dark gaze. After looking at this in silence, he raised his hands and adjusted the buttons at his cuffs and patted his black suit. Hawes. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the stacked, dark buildings ahead. Demon hunter Colin Iliad, with two swords on his back, pointed ahead and said,
"That's Afternoon Town."
He combed his grizzled hair that was flying about in the wind that swept through the wilderness.
"That's fast."
With his axe of hurricane in hand, Derek sighed wistfully in surprise. He soon realized that it was reasonable. This was because the giant king's court was located somewhere near the City of Silver. Afternoon Town was the intersecting point that connected both nodes. With the lightning that illuminated the night sky, he clearly saw Afternoon Town in its entirety. It was built at the foot of a mountain and was naturally split into upper and lower levels. Instead of calling it a town, it wasn't much smaller than most of the ruins the City of Silver found. Here, the gray stones were stacked into different buildings. Some were entirely emptied out, nearing 10 meters. Some were similar to the residence Derek currently resided in. It was short, as though any normal person would hit their heads onto the ceiling. These buildings were arranged close together before spreading out. Some of them had collapsed, while a number remained standing despite showing signs of age and tear.
"It's completely different from what's described in the textbooks."
Derek suddenly recalled the knowledge he had learned from his history lessons. According to the City of Silver's records, Afternoon Town was the door that separated reality from myth. It was a place where humans and giants lived together. There was day and night here, but most of the day was in a noon state. Regardless of the fog, storms, or snow, none of them were able to blot out the strong sunlight. But at this moment, it was dark and heavy. Even if the area was illuminated by light, it lacked a sense of brightness, and there was no signs of life. Clenching his axe tightly, Derek, whose eyes had two miniature suns, was on the flanks of the exploration team. He followed Chief Colin into Afternoon Town. This area had been cleared once on the first exploration. The streets were covered with signs of rotting flesh and dry pus. It was completely silent.
Be careful. There are many strange monsters lurking in the darkness.
Colin Iliad, with his scarred face, didn't let down his guard. He drew one of his dual swords as the silver light on his sword converged.
This is the mythical door. When the Creator abandoned this piece of land, even the myths were abandoned.
Derek couldn't help but imagine what Afternoon Town had experienced during the Cataclysm. He instinctively felt that it was probably different from the Kingdom of Silver. Before he could carefully observe his surroundings in search of possible clues, he suddenly heard a teammate on the other flank anxiously cry out.
"There's something."
Derek turned his head and saw a transparent face growing out of the wall of a 10-meter-tall stone building. The face was filled with countless cracks. With great regularity, they spiraled around the center, forming a single eye or mouth that resembled a vortex. The hurricane within the vortex was corporeal as it spewed out with a howl. The dawn-like light from within was dense, as though they were arrows of light. Bam! 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 They struck a few members of the exploration team, but they seemed to strike thick city walls. All they produced was dull and closely spaced-out thuds before disappearing into the dark environment. At some point in time, City of Silver Chief Colin Iliad was genuflecting. He stabbed the silver sword in his hand into the rotting gray ground. He had provided the front row with the strongest protection. At the same time, the other members of the exploration team methodically unleashed their attacks. Hurricanes of light and scarlet fireballs struck the monster. Right on the heels of that, the holy light that Derek summoned had landed on the vortex that resembled a single eye. Amidst the explosive boom, the boulder, which was originally covered in cracks, collapsed. A transparent face screamed as it vaporized. Although the battle was simple, Derek didn't feel happy at all. He had heard Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice discuss cases of Beyonder fights. Matching it with the experience the City of Silver had accumulated from resisting all kinds of monsters from the darkness, he worriedly discovered that the City of Silver had a limited number of pathways. Those who were not demigods lacked effective means of control, and the situation from before proved this point.
Thankfully, there are sealed artifacts that are formed when monsters die to make up for this.
Derek silently thought, as he heard the chief instruct.
Move according to plan. 3 to 4 people a group. Search and clear the different areas.
Yes, Chief. The exploration team members were mostly rich in experience. They soon formed their groups. Derek's group consisted of 3 people. Apart from him, there was Joshua and Chaim, who had been to the abandoned temple with him before. The former was a Sequence 7 weapon master, and he had a mystical glove that could control fire. The latter was a recently advanced Sequence 6 Dawn Paladin. He was tall and reached a height of 2.3 meters. The City of Silver, which had warriors, also known as the Giant Pathway, as the main force, had an average height of 1.8 meters, including children above the age of 6. Even if the Beyonder characteristics were inherited, the normal genes that were modified had accumulated with each generation. Although Derek wasn't old, he was nearly 1.8 meters tall and still had room to grow. According to the designated targets, Derek, Joshua, and Chaim entered an alley on the left in a triangular battle formation. They checked every building that still allowed entry. Perhaps as a result of the former sweep, they didn't encounter any monsters. They couldn't help but feel a little relieved.
Rumor has it that the 6-member council plans to set up camp here and make Afternoon Town a stronghold.
Joshua, who was wearing a scarlet glove on his left palm, said after observing the buildings. Chaim nodded and looked down at his 2 partners.
The true target seems to be.
He pointed diagonally upwards.
The Giant King's Court?
Derek asked in surprise.
Isn't it a search for the sea where Jack and company came from? Don't we need to circle the Giant King's Court?
Derek was filled with puzzlement. Chaim shook his head.
I've only heard rumors.
He swept his gaze and pointed at the entrance to the underground chamber.
Let's finish our search here.
Derek answered tersely. With his night vision and ability to emit light, he wasn't afraid of the darkness as he stepped into the underground chamber first. Chaim lifted an animal hide lantern while Joshua followed closely in tow. This building's underground chamber was rather wide, with traces of dried, blackening pools. The smell of blood remained, despite the many years that had passed. Derek surveyed the area and suspected that a sacrificial ritual had once been held here.
A very, very long time ago.
He silently added and discovered a candle left on the stone table which resembled an altar. He felt more certain about his guesses.
Why would the residents of Afternoon Town secretly hold sacrificial rituals in their underground basement? When the Giant King's court was in power, they were believers of the Giant King. Later, they came under the Lord that created everything. The owner of this building secretly worshipped other gods.
Questions arose in him as Derek approached the altar. He saw that the stone table was originally carved with words, but they had been damaged by either natural or unnatural elements. After some careful identification, Derek found 3 names: Ouroboros, Medici, Sasrir.
Ouroboros, isn't that the name of the angel of fate? Mr. Fool mentioned before that Medici is also a king of angels. Sasrir is another one.
Derek suddenly felt excited and horrified as he hurriedly turned his head to shout out for his companions to take a look. But in his vision, the underground chamber was empty. There was only darkness. Ham and Joshua, who were supposed to be behind him, were gone. Chapter 667, Prayer.
They're gone. There's only darkness.
Faced with such a sudden change, Derek's first reaction wasn't horror. Instead, he clasped his hands together and pressed it to his mouth. Pure light was emitted out of his body as he dispersed the surrounding darkness, illuminating every corner of the underground chamber. In Derek's living environment, darkness was the most terrifying existence. Once they left the City of Silver, they had to constantly maintain the existence of light. Even a brief loss of light couldn't last for more than 5 seconds. When Derek first joined the exploration teams and lacked experience, he had nearly killed himself because of such a mistake. Thankfully, the chief was standing nearby. As the light slowly and continuously radiated from him, Derek raised his tightly gripped axe of hurricane and carefully observed his surroundings. He discovered that apart from Chaim and Joshua, teammates who had entered the underground chamber with him, vanishing, the stone slabs and tufts of black hair on the walls had turned blood red at some point in time. They were moist as though they had just been sprayed on. This calmed down Derek, who was well versed with exploration materials, to realize a possibility. The problem didn't stem from Chaim or Joshua, but himself.
All I did was approach the altar and silently read 3 names. Typically speaking, even angels will require someone to read or write down an accurate honorific name in its complete form before they can receive prayers. And it's supposedly limited by range. I wonder if the kings of angels require the same conditions. One of those 3 names was the key to activating the hidden powers in the altar. I triggered the problem by using Jotun, which can stir the powers of nature. No, that's not right. It needs to be said out loud. Even if these are the true names of the kings of angels, I've never faced such problems in the past.
Derek anxiously turned his body while feeling perplexed. He returned to the altar and came to the stone table. He was surprised to see that the words and symbols on the stone table were a lot more complete and clearer than before. It was as though the host of the ritual had just drawn it. The words were written in 3 languages. They were in Jotun, Dragonese, and a language that Derek couldn't recognize. However, he suspected that it was the ancient Hermes previously mentioned by Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man. This was because he had a basic understanding of some words from the conversations during the tarot gathering. They were rather similar to the words used on the stone table. The content expressed by Jotun and Dragonese were identical. They repeated the 3 names and their corresponding titles. A. Angel of Fate, Ouroboros, Red Angel, Medici, Dark Angel, Sasrir. Following these names and titles was an entity Derek was very familiar with, Rose Redemption.
Sasrir really is a king of angels, one known as Dark Angel. He, Angel of Fate, and Red Angel are the founders of Rose Redemption. I wonder if Mr. Fool knows anything about him. He definitely knows a lot. The words in ancient Hermes should likely be the same content. In Afternoon Town, which had already converted to the faith of the Lord that created everything, there were residents who were secretly worshipping the three kings of angels beside the Lord.
Upon having this thought, Derek suddenly felt a chill run down his back. He felt as though he was close to the reason why the Creator had abandoned this land. When he looked up again, he saw that the walls remained red, but Chaim and Joshua were still nowhere to be seen.
Silently repeating them didn't do a thing. Perhaps they don't produce any effects on their own.
Derek drew a breath as he raised his axe of hurricane. He carefully walked towards the entrance of the underground chamber, hoping to find the problem at its roots so as to determine what led to his present situation. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Like a gigantic candle, he returned to the hall upstairs. Whoopee! There were rich shadows here, making it gloomy and eerily silent. The rotting chairs and the remnants of stone tables remained sitting there in silence, no different from before. Failing to find Joshua and Chaim, Derek could only walk towards the window while he felt high-strung. He wanted to see if he could encounter other members of the exploration team. Thud! Thud! Amidst light footstep sounds, he approached a huge hole that should have been a windowsill. He leaned forward and looked outside. Countless dark buildings spread out, either tall or short, as they extended outwards like steps. The lightning in the air happened at a very low frequency, as many windows had candlelight emitting out of them. The dim yellow flames danced, but weren't extinguished.
This.
Derek couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. He felt as though all the residents were still living in peace just before Afternoon Town encountered its cataclysm. Chaim, who was carrying an animal hide lantern, didn't need to bend his back to enter the underground chamber. He jokingly said to Joshua,
This house must belong to a human, but their family definitely has giant's bloodline in them. They're probably my height. TSK, the last time we went to that ruined city, we had to bow our heads when using the main doors.
Having a giant's bloodline didn't necessarily mean that they had giant blood flowing in them. Instead, it referred to a physical characteristic that was inherited by descendants thanks to the consumption of the Pathways potion. Being tall was one of its manifestations. Chuff! Joshua looked up at Chaim and scoffed.
That was you. I didn't need to.
But you won't take long before you can advance. When the time comes, you won't be shorter than me.
Chaim said with a smile before glancing at Derek via the corner of his eye. It was to prevent any accidents from happening when Derek approached the altar. Joshua thought before saying,
Actually, I'm very curious. Chief is a Sequence 4 demon hunter. He should be like an ordinary giant with a height of 3 to 4 meters. Why does he look very ordinary, with him being only half a head taller than me?
Chaim subconsciously surveyed the area and said,
Rumor has it that the chief has a giant form.
A giant form? Will his clothes tear when he becomes a giant?
Unless his clothes and pants are mystical items.
Chaim and Joshua exchanged a knowing smile. They were just about to turn their heads to share the joke with Derek when they realized that the youth was gone. Derek, who should have been standing before the altar, had vanished. Chaim's and Joshua's expression instantly turned heavy. One of them raised his huge broadsword, while the other raised his red-gloved left hand. They carefully approached the altar and did a careful inspection, but they failed to identify anything suspicious. Joshua was just about to attempt to identify the words on the stone table when Chaim patted him on the shoulder.
Don't look at it. I just recalled that Derek was looking at those words before he vanished. Kyle, let's bring the chief here.
Okay.
Joshua nodded. They didn't leave in a fluster. They surveyed the surroundings before one of them rubbed his index finger with his middle finger to light the remaining candle on the altar. This was to protect Derek so as to prevent him from falling into true darkness. In the past, the exploration teams of the City of Silver had similar encounters in the ruined cities. A teammate might appear to have suddenly vanished, but they had actually been concealed by some kind of power. He stood in his original location, but with his teammates eager to seek help, they would leave the area with their lanterns. Hence, the poor bastard would be devoured by the true darkness, never to be found again. If it wasn't for another teammate finding themselves in another similar situation and having been rescued on the spot, the others wouldn't have known the actual reason for the previous person's death. With the candle lit, the dim yellow light spread outwards. Chaim and Joshua immediately left and arrived at the alley where they released a spirituality signal that everyone carried. They didn't wait too long for Colin Iliad, who had jumped off from the roof of another building before landing firmly.
What happened?
The demon hunter asked in a deep voice, Chai PM, Tisami, Shimamentim Exefcho. The silver sword in his hand was already covered with a layer of light gray oil. Chai PM immediately recounted what had happened. Finally, he said,
We didn't discover the reason for Derek's disappearance.
Derek.
Colin nodded in thought, walked past them, and headed straight into the corresponding building. Despite the candles alight outside in the warm yellow color, Derek felt as though he had fallen into a frozen abyss. A chill at the bottom of his heart kept spreading. He clenched the axe of Hurricane with his right hand and retracted his gaze from the town. He turned to return to the underground chamber and stood in front of the altar again. Hayacha! He had already determined that he was the one with the problem. However, he didn't have the urge to explore the strange afternoon town. He didn't even dare open the door. Derek wasn't nervous, nor did he show any obvious signs of flusterness. This was because he didn't believe that he had encountered something severe.
As long as it's not an immediate threat, it's nothing severe.
Derek took a silent breath, bowed his head, and reverently whispered,
The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the grey fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck.
Klein, who had been admiring the scenery of the battlefield of the gods, had no choice but to enter the bathroom, set up the disruptive items, and take 4 steps counterclockwise to head above the gray fog. He sat at the high-backed chair at the end of the long bronze table. He stretched out his right hand and emanated his spirituality, touching the crimson star which represented Little Sun. Suddenly, the prayers turned abnormally clear as the corresponding scene appeared before Klein's eyes. He first saw the still hazy Little Sun before discovering that the environment around him was abnormal. Swirling around the sun was an unspeakable darkness, and in the darkness there were eyes of different shapes silently watching him. The eyes were densely packed and hidden in the darkness. They were like unwelcomed observers, which Little Sun hadn't noticed at all.
Afternoon town. Is that dangerous?
Klein was very aware of what Dear Sun was up to lately, Makla. He thought for a moment and instinctively believed that the darkness was extremely strange and surreal. Therefore, he abandoned the option of using the Sea God Scepter to respond to Little Sun. Instead, he switched to pulling him up above the gray fog. Klein extended his spirituality, but he felt as though the crimson star seemed to be in a quagmire, making it rather difficult for him to pull him over.
Which king of angels has he crossed this time?
With a thought, Klein made the mysterious space, and the gray fog beneath him produced ripples. After advancing to sequence 5, he could stir some of the powers above the gray fog, without the use of the Black Emperor card and the corresponding rituals. Silently, Klein easily completed transporting Derek as his figure appeared on the high-backed chair belonging to him. Meanwhile, Klein saw the strange darkness swirling around Little Sun's body shatter. The demon hunter entered the underground chamber in high alert, followed closely by Chaim and Joshua. They saw that in front of the dim yellow candlelight, Derek Berg's figure was quickly outlined like a picture. Chapter 668. Confidence might also be a weakness. Above the gray fog, in the palace that was held up by stone columns. Derek quickly repeated his encounter to Mr. Fool. Dark Angel Sasrir. The names and titles of these kings of angels seem to have been washed away by the rivers of history. Almost no one knows of them. If it weren't for Little Sun discovering them in the forsaken land of God, or me directly encountering the ancient evil spirit suspected to be Red Angel himself, I might not even know a single king of angels. At best, I would have heard of the Amen family and would have no way of delving deeper into the blasphemer. Where's this dark angel at present? Is he still alive? Is he still one of the upper echelons of the Rose Redemption? Klein felt wistful. Afraid that little son would ask him related questions that he couldn't answer, Klein instantly stopped his contemplations and leisurely leaned back into the chair and said,
You have been freed from your predicament. Your companions will soon find you.
As he spoke, he didn't give little son a chance to speak by directly cutting off the connection. As for an explanation in the event that little son was discovered to be abnormal, Klein disdained the thought of reminding him to fabricate an explanation. To mysteriously disappear and then appear again, wasn't it very normal that all sorts of strange scenarios accompanied it? At that moment, Derek was very grateful that Mr. Fool didn't ask him any further questions. This was because he was afraid that he would be exposed to the lethal darkness or hidden monsters once he escaped the alternate afternoon town. Therefore, he was eagerly hoping to regain control of his body as soon as possible, so as to prepare the necessary precautions. However, if Mr. Fool had really asked a question, he would still seriously and very patiently explain the corresponding situation. With his consciousness returning to his body, Derek rapidly recovered his senses. When he opened his eyes, he saw a candle which was almost done burning. The wick's flame was wavering in the wind. Immediately after that, he discovered that the chief was standing to his side at some point in time. The tall Haim and the red-gloved Joshua were warily standing 2 steps behind. Ha! How long have they been watching me like that? Although Derek had already thought of a reason above the gray fog, he still felt guilty and nervous.
What did you encounter?
Derek didn't immediately answer, as it would appear as though he had already fabricated an excuse. He used a trick taught by the hanged man. He deliberately paused for a few seconds, and as he recalled, he described while recalling the events in a rather staccato manner.
I saw the altar after entering the underground chamber. I suspected that it was an altar and tried to identify the remnant words and symbols on it. I recognized 3 names. One of them was Angel of Fate Ouroboros. At this point, the light from the lantern extinguished. When I turned my head to look, Haim and Joshua had vanished. I created a light source and walked out of the underground chamber, and discovered that the outside was still afternoon town. However, many of the buildings had candles lit inside them as though humans were living in them. I didn't dare to leave the building, and I returned to the underground chamber. I attempted to do what I did again. Chief, in that afternoon town, the words on the altar were very complete. There were a total of 3 languages. One was Jotun, the other Dragonese, and another I didn't recognize. However, the first 2 languages expressed the same words. They were the names and titles of the 3 angels, as well as Rose Redemption. Later, I found myself back here.
What he said was the truth, and it was very complete. All he did was hide the details of how he returned. Derek didn't have any hopes of successfully lying to the chief. He planned on being confused when he was pressed, pushing the reasons onto the abnormality of his body that he didn't understand. This will definitely make the chief suspicious, but Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice from the Spectator Pathway all said that he wouldn't ask too many questions regarding such matters. By appearing abnormal, will he think more importantly of me? I will be viewed as a chess piece that can counterbalance Elder Lovia.
The outside world sure is complicated. It was only recently that I fully understood their train of thought.
Derek couldn't help but sigh inwardly. In a dire environment, the depletion of every ounce of strength would mean more danger for the City of Silver. It had very few instances in the past, and even if it happened, it was basically concentrated within the 6-member council. The first thing the other Beyonders learned in their patrols and adventuring was cooperation. Colin nodded gently, walked to the altar, and attempted what Derek described, but he didn't disappear as a result of this. He remained standing in his original spot.
From the looks of it, the remnant powers have already completed their mission.
The demon hunter muttered softly to himself.
I didn't even need to fabricate an excuse.
Derek thought, feeling somewhat embarrassed. Cullen thought for a moment before turning his head to look at Derek.
What are the corresponding titles of Medici and Sasria?
Red Angel and Dark Angel.
Derek was honest. Colin nodded gently, seemingly in thought.
In a small number of books there is mention of a Red Angel, but with no actual name associated with it. As for Dark Angel Sasria, he has completely been lost to history.
Derek was just about to take the opportunity to ask about the other kings of angels when he suddenly noticed that the candlelight in the underground chamber had dimmed, as though a shadow was surging in from outside.
Let's leave this place for now.
The demon hunter Colin said cautiously, having sensed the same thing. With the axe of hurricane in hand, Derek immediately approached Chaim and Joshua to form a battle formation with them. However, just as he took one step, he discovered that Chaim had retreated 2 meters to the side. Joshua had raised his left red-gloved hand. Both of them didn't hide their wariness as their eyes keenly observed him. Derek knew that this was a very normal reaction from them. This was because lessons regarding explorations had the corresponding teachings. Be observant and make less contact with companions who had just escaped a strange situation.
And I haven't clearly explained how I escaped that strange afternoon town.
Derek opened his mouth in a bid to explain, but he closed his mouth in silence again. He felt ashamed and aggrieved as he pursed his lips. Holding the axe of hurricane, he turned and followed the chief, taking one step at a time before leaving the underground chamber. The quartet soon arrived at the entrance and was prepared to leave. To their surprise, they realized that the afternoon town, with shadows cloaking its buildings, had appeared to have darkened a little. Almost instantaneously, there was candlelight shining out from different windows, from different buildings. The dim yellowish lights were either connected or disconnected, silent and heavy. Klein didn't stay too long above the gray fog. He quickly returned to the bathroom and put away the corresponding items. Let's hope that there wouldn't be any more incidents on Little Sun's side. It wouldn't be too good for me to repeatedly enter the bathroom. People in the know will realize that I'm hiding a secret, but those not in the know would definitely think that Gehrman Sparrow has a bladder problem. It would be a tarnish on my persona. Although I've already digested the faceless potion, Marionettist Rosago went from one sequence to the next. The Beyonder characteristic he left behind obviously contains a set of the faceless potion. Using this Beyonder characteristic as a main ingredient is equivalent to me drinking an additional faceless magician, clown, and seer potion, or even more.
Sigh, I should still try my best to abide by the various principles I previously concluded, so as to digest the excess portions.
Klein made some clean water and washed his face before walking out of the bathroom. Just as he was wondering if it was almost time for dinner and was planning to take out his golden pocket watch to take a look, the scene before his eyes suddenly turned black. He could hardly see his fingers.
It's night again. The intervals don't follow a pattern. If we encounter a monster and both sides are in an intense battle, what happens when the sky suddenly turns dark? Monsters are also creatures, so they need to sleep as well. Otherwise, there's a high chance that they will disappear into the night. Heh. Both parties in combat have to lie down and sleep, only to continue when they wake up. Is this really a story that can pass the censors?
Klein, who had relaxed after successfully advancing, lampooned as he quickly walked to his bed. Just as he got in bed, he suddenly thought of a problem. The night here is very dangerous. If living creatures do not sleep, they will vanish completely. The darkness of the forsaken land of God, including the city of Silver, is similarly dangerous. If there's no light to disperse the darkness, humans would completely vanish if the darkness exceeds 5 seconds.
It's really similar. Could there really be some connection here?
Klein shook his head and, with cogitation, entered a dream. Amidst the dream, he realized that he had switched locations again once he became lucid. The last time he left the dream, he was on the boulder where Admiral of Stars Catalea was sitting as she hugged her knees. This time, he was facing a staircase. The light of the sunset shined through the colored glass panes high above, making the black, spiraling staircase adorned with sculptures look exceedingly beautiful. Klein instinctively looked to the side and found Queen Mystic standing high up the staircase. This long, chestnut-haired lady wasn't wearing her dress with open hems. Her top was a white shirt with lace and flowery bands, matched with a simple dark blue coat. Her lower half was still the beige-colored trousers with black leather boots. However, Klein believed that Queen Mystic probably had an entire wardrobe, or even a room full of trousers and leather boots of the same style.
What's the matter?
Klein took the initiative to ask.
Confidence might be a weakness at times. You trust that copper whistle and paper crane of yours too much. Perhaps one day, it will be the source of danger.
Klein felt a little uneasy at that, but he didn't show it.
I don't understand what you mean.
Confidence might be a weakness at times. Catilia trusts the sealed artifact she gave Heath Doyle too much. If I hadn't boarded the ship, then Nina, frankly, and her would have died. But you might survive.
That sealed artifact isn't actually able to block the ravings that fill these waters. That's how Heath Doyle mutated?
Klein acutely read in between the lines.
Under ordinary circumstances it can. But do you know who the ravings that fill these waters come from?
Without waiting for Klein's reply, she gave the answer.
The true creator.
Chapter 669. Exchange of Information. The True Creator? The ravings that fill these waters come from the True Creator? Upon hearing Queen Mystic's answer, Klein was surprised, while feeling somewhat joyful. He was rejoicing because, just as Queen Mystic said, if she hadn't boarded the ship, Heath Doyle might have undergone a mutation, even with the existence of a sealed artifact, which could reduce his auditory senses to a certain effect. Towards low and mid-sequence beyonders of other pathways, they would only feel repressed and frustrated, or they would occasionally suffer from nightmares when faced with the True Creator's ravings without actually listening to them. But to a Rose Bishop, the sequence 0 for his corresponding pathway was the True Creator. To be immersed in the ravings of this evil god, even if he was deaf, something would have happened to him sooner or later. Once Heath Doyle went mad or lost control, together with the uniqueness of these waters, it was truly difficult for the rest of the people on board the ship to be safe. However, Klein believed that as long as he could survive the sudden attack, he would have the chance to pray to the Fool and use the Sea God Scepter above the gray fog to provide a response to resolve the problem. He was surprised that the owner of the ravings was in complete contradiction with his theory. He originally imagined that these waters were the battlefield between the ancient gods and the Creator worshipped by the City of Silver during the Second Epoch. He suspected that the subsidiary gods, who were also the corresponding angels, had participated in it as well. To his surprise, this appeared to be wrong from the beginning. This was because the True Creator had apparently first appeared after the Third Epoch's cataclysm.
I cannot rule out the possibility that the ravings were later left behind.
Klein didn't blindly make a conclusion. He watched as Queen Mystic walked past him as she caressed the sculptures on the handrail and slowly walked down. The lady's back was tall, neither fat nor thin. Her figure was extremely proportioned, and her long chestnut hair simply cascaded down. This made Klein feel a sense of familiarity. After recalling the matters involving Queen Mystic, he finally recalled the source of the familiarity. Back when he was searching for the cards of blasphemy at the Roselle Memorial Exhibition, he had seen a similar back. Back then, the figure dressed somewhat oddly. Despite wearing a yellow layered dress which had the vibes of a young girl, she wore a black, out-of-fashion bonnet.
She was likely Queen Mystic. She had also visited the Roselle Memorial Exhibition ahead of time. Back then, she was looking at the basic education books the Emperor had improved for his children and the Chinese chess and toy blocks. She was certain that I had taken the Black Emperor card.
The Emperor's eldest daughter, Bernadette, established the element Dawn to resist the Moses ascetic order. And from the diary, that lady appreciates the maxim, do as you wish, but do no harm. Therefore, from these 2 points, it can be inferred that she's likely a demigod of the Mystery Prior pathway. The Mystery Prior pathway's sequence 4 is mysticologist.
Queen Mystic. Of course, the reputation of Queen Mystic has long been known across the seas for more than 100 years. She's definitely not a sequence 4 anymore. Yes, after Katea left Queen Mystic, she joined the Moses ascetic order. This queen seems to take the interpretation of Roselle's diary very seriously.
All sorts of fragmented pieces of information came together as Klein suddenly had a theory.
Perhaps Queen Mystic was Emperor Roselle's eldest daughter, Bernadette Gustave. This might explain why this queen dresses in a style that resembles Earth's, but also appears rather strange. She has been deeply influenced by the Emperor's preferences, and she's unable to completely extricate herself from the fashion trends. Hence, she mixes them into a unique and strange style she can call her own. As for it being aesthetically pleasing, that's a whole other matter. A beautiful person will look good and fashionable even with a gunny sack.
Klein lampooned inwardly, but he wore a solemn expression. He unhurriedly followed Queen Mystic down the beautiful staircase. Queen Mystic didn't turn her head. As she walked, she said,
This dream world isn't vast. There are only two parts. One of them is the projection of the giant king's court on the opposite mountain, and the other is the black cloister over here.
Giant King's Court? The majestic building complex that seemed frozen in the sunset surfaced in Klein's mind.
This is actually the projection of the Giant King's Court, and Little Sun and Company happened to be at the entrance of the Giant King's Court afternoon town.
Queen Mystic said with a gentle but emotionless tone.
This is my theory, as it resembles the Great Twilight Hall in Fasak. And in the Fourth Epoch, there has always been rumors that the god of combat is an ancient giant who survived the cataclysm.
The god of combat pathway is the giant pathway.
I inwardly expressed my agreement with Queen Mystic's theory. At that moment, he recalled the mythical information he had received from Little Sun. He realized that the description of the Giant King's court being forever residing in the sunset matched the spectacle of the opposite mountain. From the true creator to the Giant King's court, she has revealed two extremely valuable pieces of information. She's expressing her goodwill to me. No, the entity backing me. Heh, and the person backing me is myself.
Klein calmly replied,
The real Giant King's court is in the forsaken land of God.
He said this matter in an indifferent tone so as to accentuate his value and the entity backing him. Wa-wuka. Queen Mystic stopped in her tracks as she pressed down on the beautifully sculptured handrail with her right palm. She half-turned her body to face Gehrman Sparrow and said at an adequate speed,
Rumor has it that the path leading to the forsaken land of God is hidden in the mountain across us, hidden in the projection of the Giant King's court.
So Little Sun and Company have begun exploring Afternoon Town? But didn't Jack mention that they appeared by the sea? The Giant King's court and the projection of the Giant King's court must have switches in them. Only by opening them ahead of time can the two seas meet. This place is filled with the true Creator's ravings, and it hides the secret of the forsaken land of God. It has remnant powers of the Evernight, Sun, Storm, Earth, and Spectator pathway. This seems to correspond to the Cataclysm. After the Cataclysm, the forsaken land of God was isolated from the outside world. The goddess, Eternal Blazing Sun, Lord of Storms, Earth Mother, and Company saved the world while the true Creator appeared. Only the Spectator pathway's imagination doesn't exactly add up.
Klein made a guess based on whatever information he knew at hand. Queen Mystic continued walking down as she said,
The black cloister here doesn't appear big, but each building and every level represents a different part of these waters. Behind every door might hide the dream of a creature.
I see.
Klein glanced at the handrail and discovered that the sculpture on it was mainly that of a human's head. It was beautiful at a glance, but terrifying on careful inspection. Hence, he asked in passing,
Whose dream does this staircase belong to?
Queen Mystic calmly explained,
An undying from the numinous episcopate. He came here in search of death's remains, one of the main requirements of the artificial death. However, he lost control as a result of the ravings, and he's forever loitering in an underground ruin, turning every adventurer who dares to enter into becoming his zombie.
Death was also involved in the battle of gods that happened here. It's no wonder Admiral Hell would take the risk and enter these waters from time to time.
Klein felt enlightened. He wasn't alarmed about the matter regarding artificial death, as he had previously heard Demoness of Unaging Katerina Pelle mention it before. Furthermore, the numinous episcopate seemed to be rather far from success. At this moment, just as Queen Mystic finished walking down the stairs, she turned to glance at him. Right on the heels of that, the lady turned into a corridor and entered a building. Klein surveyed the area and discovered that there was no longer any stairs leading downwards. They were apparently at the bottom level. Queen Mystic stopped in front of the black wooden door filled with strange patterns. She gripped its handle and said,
I've always suspected that the dream within is the key to sustaining this place. The remnant powers of Evernight only provides the possibility of such a development.
As she spoke, she twisted the handle and opened the door. The black door slowly moved backward, and behind it wasn't a room as Klein had imagined, but a sea. The sea was illuminated by blinding sunlight. The waves were huge swaths of rich gold. As the door opened, Klein felt an unimaginable aura seep out from inside. The entire building began to quake in an obvious manner as the dust and bricks on the wall began to fall.
Subtly, I felt that the dream was on the brink of shattering.
At this moment, Queen Mystic pulled her right hand, shutting the black wooden door tightly. Everything was restored to normal as a result of this.
Even I do not dare enter.
Klein calmly said, as though he had someone backing him, allowing him to grasp the situation ahead of time.
This place has the dreams of certain remnant deities.
Queen Mystic turned around as her blue eyes swept over Garamond Sparrow's face.
These waters and this black cloister hide a lot of secrets. My understanding of it might not even reach a single %.
She didn't continue as she silently looked at Garamond Sparrow, as though waiting for something.
What intense pressure!
Klein thought for a moment and asked probingly,
Do you know the activation incantation of the Black Emperor card?
Queen Mystic fell silent for a few seconds and shook her head. Klein looked her in the eye.
Bernadette.
The entire corridor turned so silent that even their breathing could be heard. Queen Mystic's lips moved a little before they pursed together. Her blue eyes temporarily lost their focus, but they quickly recovered their profundity. Queen Mystic turned around at an adequate speed, walked to the black staircase, and said, without a change in tone,
The dream is ending.
Klein looked at her back, move up the black staircase until the blinding light drowned out everything. Haas, afternoon town. Upon seeing the candlelight light up in the buildings outside, the silent town seemed to come to life. Derek felt as though they had plummeted into a nightmare as they instantly tensed up. Demon Hunter Colin observed for a while before solemnly saying,
We are in the real world. The power of the altar has leaked out.
Chapter 670, Repenter. That strange afternoon town has infiltrated the afternoon town in reality? Derek vaguely understood what the chief was saying, as he had a rough guess as to why this had happened. He suspected that when Mr. Fool pulled him out of the strange afternoon town, he had broken an intricate balance, causing the powers to seep out. This also explained why Demon Hunter Colin Iliad didn't vanish immediately when he repeated the attempt. Just as Derek was wondering what kind of changes this would bring, the chief of the 6-member council, Colin, had taken out a luminescent powder from a pouch on his belt, and he scattered it in the air. The powder suddenly blasted apart, spewing silver light upwards. It made it appear extremely obvious in such a dark environment. Derek, Ham, and Joshua knew very well what this signal meant. It meant not to run about haphazardly, stay in your area, be wary against any incoming enemies, and await rescue. Without a doubt, this was a signal to all the other exploration teams scattered across Afternoon Town. Colin consecutively released the signal thrice in the span of 2 lightning bolts. Then he turned and said to Derek and company,
We shall meet up with the rest by combing outwards. Be careful along the way.
Yes, Chief.
Derek had already forgotten the grievance from before, only wishing that he could help his partners as soon as possible. Following Colin's instructions, he took the left flank of the small team. On the other side was the red-gloved Joshua, who held an iron-black sword. Lining the back was the relatively stronger Dawn Paladin Hayem, and right in front was the Demon Hunter, who was about 3 steps away. As lightning flashed at relatively fast intervals, the gloomy afternoon town would go from being bright to darkness. The candlelight from each window showed a wavering flame that burned in silence and calmness. Derek was no longer the fledgling he once was. Although he was nervous, his palm didn't sweat while holding the axe of Hurricane. He skillfully moved his gaze around, wary against any monster that might leap out from the buildings on both sides. After a flash of lightning, the world was thrown back into darkness. The bits of candlelight in Afternoon Town seemed to await travelers that needed lodging. As for the animal hide lantern in Hayem's hand, its light scattered outward, but it failed to produce much light in a radius around him. It wasn't as effective as Derek's night vision. The only usage was that it appeared to dispel the rich darkness around them. At that moment, Derek suddenly felt a chill down his neck, but there wasn't any cold winds. He didn't turn his head subconsciously. Instead, he took one step diagonally, half-turned his body, and glanced through the corner of his eye. He saw the nearly 2.3-meter-tall Haim looking at him with a gloomy expression. He cleaved down with the broadsword in his hand. Bang! Derek somersaulted to dodge the strike as he seemed to still hear the echoing sound of the intense wind. Following that, he heard the chief's voice.
What happened?
Haim attacked me.
Derek rolled towards Colin's direction and stood up.
Me?
Haim held the animal hide lantern in one hand and his broadsword in the other, asking with a look of puzzlement. Colin glanced at Derek.
I didn't discover any abnormality on his part.
As he spoke, the demon hunter's eyes produced two dark green symbols. He surveyed the area and said,
The attacker transformed its appearance to Haim's?
Before he finished his sentence, the silver sword that was clenched tightly in his right hand stabbed backward. Oof! Amidst the dull clashing sounds, a figure appeared in the dark environment. He had grizzled and disheveled hair, with deep wrinkles. He had weathered but profound blue eyes, and he held a silver sword with light gray oil slathered over it, looking identical to Demon Hunter Colin. The only difference was his gloomy expression and dark skin. Bam, bam, bam. Two silver swords clashed in midair, sending sparks flying. Meanwhile, Colin Iliad shouted with a deep voice,
Light!
Light? Derek instinctively raised his hands and pressed them to his mouth and nose. At that instant, he discovered three figures dashing out from the surrounding darkness. One of them was the tall and muscular Ham, another the red-gloved Joshua, and the last one was a tall person with a childlike appearance, Derek himself. Derek wasn't thrown into a fluster. He acted in accordance with the chief's instructions and released lustrous brilliance from his body. The three figures seemed horrified of this as they raised their palms to cover their faces while attempting to escape to the sides. However, their speeds were in no way comparable to the speed of light. The lustrous brilliances illuminated the surroundings, enveloping the three figures within. They opened their mouths and let out silent screams, but they soon dimmed and vanished. As the light surged outwards, the two demon hunters were consumed by the light. The actions of one of them immediately turned stiff and was impeded before losing its color and turning completely black. Oof! The silver sword with light grayish oil slathered on it penetrated the monster, but it seemed to stab into air, failing to cause any actual damage. At this moment, the black monster suddenly immolated itself, cracking into distorted shadows as they corroded the light and flames, inch by inch. Colin retracted his silver sword and turned his head to Derek and company.
The monsters this time are our shadows. Their weakness is the brightness of light.
As he spoke, the chief's body produced a bright and holy light of dawn, illuminating the entire street as though it was day. This was a beyonder power a Dawn Paladin would receive from the warrior pathway. The reason why he didn't use it from the beginning was because the effects were obvious, and he had no idea what kind of accident it might bring. Now he was already aware of the weaknesses of these monsters in Afternoon Town. The light of dawn produced by the chief was like a domain. Haim gave up his plans on using a similar beyonder power. He continued holding up his animal hide lantern, and he followed behind Colin Iliad with Derek and Joshua as they turned into another street. Before long, the quartet arrived at a half-collapsed cathedral. The cathedral originally had a tower, and its entirety was made up of classical stone columns and masonry. They were heavy and dark. Passing through the door that even a giant would find wide, Derek followed the chief and came to the prayer hall. They saw the deity's statue destroyed, but the candle on the altar had been lit by some unknown entity. In front of the altar, a figure donning a Spartan white robe was prostrated there, praying so softly that no one could hear him.
He's not one of us.
Haim, who also had night vision, was the first to discover the abnormality thanks to his height.
This means that it's not a monster that was transformed from our teammates. shadows.
Derek helped Haim express the context between the lines inwardly. This meant an unknown, and an unknown often represented extreme danger. There should have been an exploration team here. Colin converged the range of his light of dawn to prevent himself from provoking the white-robed figure. Haim, Joshua, and Derek suddenly fell silent. Under such a situation, the absence of the exploration team's immediate appearance basically meant an undesirable outcome. Their minds raced as two men dressed in tight black clothes walked out from the right side of the hall. They were the two members of the exploration team at the cathedral. One of the teammates swiftly made his way to Colin and immediately said in agitation and fear, "Chief, those shadows are problematic." Leroy was swallowed by his own shadow.
Has someone already been sacrificed?
While Derek's heart sank, he saw the light of dawn expand, enveloping the two teammates within. The two of them suddenly wore ferocious expressions as their bodies rapidly darkened. Just 2 seconds later, they completely vanished like shadows that had been illuminated. Smack! 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 White bones and globs of bloody flesh fell from their bodies, smashing to the ground. Light slowly effused out of these mangled carcasses. Colin retracted his gaze as he said, without an expression,
Go to the side of the ecclesiastic and hear what it's reciting.
Derek and company nodded in silence as they set off towards the collapsed statue. About 10 steps later, they discerned the white-robed figure's appearance from diagonally across. He was a crying, middle-aged man with deep features. This ecclesiastic's face was nearly plastered to the ground as he muttered to himself,
"Omnipotent Lord, I repent," tempted Sasria. The kings often came to the palace belonging to the dusk to conspire. It was unknown when the people in this town changed. They set up secret altars and held strange rituals, doing things you forbade. It was already too late by the time I discovered all of this. Degeneration, bloodshed, darkness, rot, murders, corruption, and shadows had already drowned this piece of land. A huge calamity will begin here.
A huge calamity would begin here? The abandonment from the Lord that created everything of this land, is this where it began? Also, who tempted Dark Angel Sasria? This ecclesiastic should have stated who. It's because after he said the words "I repent," there should have been a name, but it was blank. He had originally said it, but the name vanished by itself. Who wiped it away? This ecclesiastic should have been from that strange afternoon town. After the balance was broken, he appeared here. Otherwise, he should have been discovered on the previous exploration.
Many thoughts flashed through his mind in a short span of time. At that moment, he saw the chief take a stride, walking to the side of the ecclesiastic in white. Klein woke up from his dream as the midday sunlight shone at his eyes from outside the window. He rolled out of bed, and he unhurriedly arrived at the pirates' dining hall. When Frank Lee saw his arrival, he immediately waved at him.
"German, I discovered something new."
Tom K., what now?
Klein immediately felt his heart in his mouth.
A new invention of yours?
No, it isn't.
Frank shook his head in excitement.
I was planning on studying the fish in these waters. They will likely be able to dream. Just as I tried fishing, I ended up getting this strange item.